This quick tutorial is just to outline some of the key differences between the PinPoint 2 and the PinPoint 3 system. The main things that you're going to find is that the extension harnesses are pretty much exactly the same as PinPoint 2. They're 6-pin male to female DT connectors. The difference between the PinPoint 2 and the PinPoint 3 in that regard is that PinPoint 3 has unfused extensions because the hub has internal circuit protection in the event of a short circuit. Whereas with our PinPoint 2 system, which is pictured with this hub right here, it did not have internal circuit protection, and we relied on an external fuse in the extension harness to protect that. So again, the fused harnesses will work with a PinPoint 2 hub or a PinPoint 3 hub, and but you can just use unfused harnesses with the PinPoint 3 hub. So in this picture right here, the next thing is that the VCMs are exactly identical. They operate on different software, but the VCMs are the same. And the last difference is instead of having the cap view in the cab, obviously the PinPoint 3 is going to be on the virtual terminal or your rate controller that's in the cab, and it's going to operate as a on the UT screen. So in this picture right here, we have a PinPoint 2 hub, just to show you, what it's been like in the past. So a PinPoint 2 hub was designed to basically, you had your rate controller that controlled your machine, and the rate controller tied into the flow meter, the servo valves, any shut-off valves, whatever you had on that machine. And then the PinPoint 2 hub basically sat right in the middle between the rate controller and the machine functions. So you had a servo port where we intercepted the servo signal and then drove the pump. We had a pressure port where we intercepted the pressure signals on the machine or got those directly from our pressure sensor. We had a flow meter port where we got in between the flow meter and the rate controller and corrected that signal when we needed to. We had a couple other ports up here at the top for some other options. And then a really, really big change into PinPoint 3 is on PinPoint 2, down the left and right hand sides of that hub, these 6 ports right here, not including the 7th one down here, but these top 6 ports here and the top 6 ports that were on the other side of this hub, those were all the CAN channels where we tied the VCMs into. And on PinPoint 2, that is one CAN bus. So in other words, every VCM on that plugged into that connector, but all of those VCMs were on the same CAN network, on the same CAN channel. So the CAN bus had a really hard time differentiating, which VCM was on the leftmost side of the boom versus the rightmost side of the boom. And we had to go through and pull them all in order from left to right to make sure that it knew exactly where they were. So, and then of course down here at the bottom of this, we had where our switched inputs for our physical boom switch on-off signals, if those were present, would go into on either side of the hub, and then power and ground down at the bottom. So this is the PinPoint 3 hub. There's a lot of differences in this PinPoint 3 hub. So the PinPoint 2 hub had half the connectors coming out of the face and half the connectors out of the side. This PinPoint 3 hub has all the connectors coming out of the face. So it has a relatively similar footprint as far as height and width to the PinPoint 2 hub. It's a little bit wider. One of the differences you'll see here is in this mounting hardware, we have these tie straps on here so that you can secure your cables to them, which anything that you plug into the hub, you can then route down here to these tie places where you can, strain relief bracket is what I was looking for. So you can use these to make the install look really nice, and also have plenty of strain relief against your harnesses so that we're not pulling against any connection. Also, the connections are all extremely different from PinPoint 2. and we'll work on the left-hand side of the hub over here. So the primary difference between PinPoint 2 and PinPoint 3 is PinPoint 3 set in between the rate controller and what was going on with the machine. And it kind of, if you will, jockeyed the information back and forth from the machine to the rate controller and served as kind of an intermediary device. The PinPoint 3, it doesn't do that. The PinPoint 3 is the rate controller on the machine. It is the device that, sends the rate to the solenoid valves. It determines what pump PWM the pump is going to spin at. It records all the data. So the PinPoint 3 is not a go-between between the rate controller and the machine. The PinPoint 3 is the rate controller. So for that reason, it has some added functionality that the PinPoint 2 didn't have. And if we look over here on this left-hand side, you'll see that we have 8 6-pin Deutsch connections, and also you'll see this label over here that says section valves. So if we look at this first connector right here, you have a power, a signal, and a ground to go drive and turn on a ball valve or a solenoid valve or whatever type of valve your machine is equipped with. If your machine isn't equipped with these ball valves, then you won't have to use those section ports. Then there's also a second one out here. So there's only 8 total ports on here, but each one of these can drive up to 2 ball valves each. So one can turn on ball valve 1 or ball valve 9. 2 can turn on ball valve 2 and ball valve 10. So you have power, signal, ground, and then you have signal out for an additional ball valve in there. You also have an input in here so that we can accept a pressure for each ball valve that we have on the machine. So that's not a function that we're using quite yet, but anyways, if you have section valves on the machines, that's what these are going to be used for, to turn those section valves on and off. You can go up to a maximum of 16 section valves if you wanted to have physical section valves on your machine. So that's really what the left half of this hub does. Now we'll jump over and we'll come over to the right half of the hub, and this says VCM. So logically, this is where we're going to plug in each one of the VCMs that's mounted on the boom. So you may have a machine that has more than 8 VCMs mounted on it, and we're going to handle that just like we did with PinPoint 2. If we've got one of these channels that requires more than 1 VCM to be in it, we're going to use one of those CAN-Y splices where we tee 2 VCMs together and then run an extension back to the hub, so we can have up to 2 VCMs in each one of these CAN channels. So PinPoint 2 had 6 on one side and it had 6 on the other side, so it had a total of 12. PinPoint 3 only has 8 on it, but there's a difference. It's not just that there's 4 less ports to plug into here. These are far different. Each one of these is an independent CAN channel. So this is CAN channel 1, CAN channel 2, CAN channel 3, 4, 5, and so on. And what that means is that each one of these are individually broken up into their own CAN communication. So the VCMs that are plugged into CAN channel 1, they're not seeing the VCMs in CAN channel 2, which is completely isolated. So we put in, instead of like PinPoint 2 having having 1 CAN channel, we put 8 completely separate CAN channels in here. And what that really provides us is about 8 times the busing capacity. So we get a significantly higher volume of data that we can pass back and forth between valves and VCMs and the hub, along with the ability to also drive more valves as a result. So, and we get some additional benefits from a diagnostic perspective, because on a PinPoint 2, where every VCM is tied into a single CAN channel, if VCM number 5 fails and pulls the CAN network down, you have a really hard time figuring out, okay, well, is VCM in CAN channel 1 pulling down the CAN and the alarm that I'm getting is for 5, or is it actually 5 that's down? And in order to isolate when all the VCMs or the CAN nodes are tied into one CAN bus, the only real way to isolate what's causing an issue is to use process of elimination, where we kind of run them one at a time, or a little bit of swap gnostics, where we try and swap some extension cables around or swap some parts out to see if we can get the failure mode to go away. So we don't have to do that with PinPoint 3, because if CAN channel 1 goes down, it's isolated from CAN channel 2. So it cannot pull down what's in CAN channel 2. So if you're getting an error that says there's a CAN failure on channel 1, you know that it's either in the extension that's in 1 or it's in the VCM that's in 1. So this really, really helps us isolate and pare down issues so that we can find them much faster, repair them much faster, and it also provides us a fantastic tool for setup. With PinPoint 2, all the VCMs go onto the same CAN channel, and we have to get all of those VCMs in the correct order across the boom so it knows which node is in which location. But with PinPoint 3, we don't necessarily have to get all those in the right order across the machine, because we're going to take the VCMs that are on the leftmost side of the boom, and we're going to put them in CAN channel 1. So the PinPoint automatically knows those are the far left VCMs. 2's the same way. So it's going to, by plugging these into their specific CAN channel, it's going to actually know what their location is relative to each other across the boom, so that we don't have to go get all the serial numbers and serialize these things in order across the boom, which makes initial setup easier. It also makes, if you have a part that fails, instead of having to go back and do a complete location setup where we pull a VCM out, we put another one in, maybe flash the firmware to it, and then we go back and we get it in the right sequence and take all of those steps. With PinPoint 3, if we have to replace a VCM for some reason, we're going to pop that VCM out. We're going to pop a new one in. That VCM is going to know exactly where it's supposed to be at within the CAN channel that it was plugged into. And not only that, but whenever we power cycle it, the PinPoint 3 is going to go check and see if it's on the correct revision of firmware against all the other VCMs that are installed on the machine. And if it's not on the correct revision of firmware, it's actually going to go on and load the proper software to that VCM. So now all of a sudden, when we have to do diagnostics or swap parts or any of these other things, it becomes a really, really simple task to handle. We'll go down here at the bottom. Very obvious, there's a power and a ground lug that will come directly from the battery. Down here at the center middle right there, we have boom switches. So this can be, if you have a physical switch box that you wanted to tie into a PinPoint 3 hub, you could put up to 8 physical switches in here. So that would be like a 12-volt on-off flip switch that would tell, if you flipped switch 1 on pin 1, it would turn off CAN channel 1. So this boom switch right here gives you a way to have a physical switch box if that's something you should ever want. You have this ISO CAN port right here. So this is where we take in the ISO CAN high, the ISO CAN low, and key switched power. Those are the 3 primary functions that we're taking into that. So we get power and ground in there, or CAN high and CAN low in there, and we get the key switch from the ISO bus. So basically, whenever you turn on the ISO bus, that key switch turns on, and that's what tells this hub to wake up and go to work. So we leave it tied into the battery, and then key switched off the ISO bus, turns the hub on, and you'll see these status lights start to work after that. The next one connector up we have is pressure flow. You can put in up to 2 pressure sensors, a boom pressure sensor and a sparge pressure sensor. You can also put in up to 2 flow meters in this port, which could be a fill flow meter and a main product or distribution flow meter. So those would go into this pressure flow port. And then we have a servo port here, and we can drive up to 2 servo valves out of this. So that could be a PWM 12 volt, that could be a standard regulating valve, whatever type of servo valve you have. We pretty much have the capability to drive it out of here. So those are the hub functions. There's some really major differences between the PinPoint 2 and the PinPoint 3, and most of the differences occur in the actual hub because the extensions are pretty much the same, the VCMs are the same, the cap box goes away, but the function of this hub and what each of these ports do is a little bit different. Another big change that we've made with these hubs is that if you look at the back of it, you'll have all of these screws, so it actually has a removable plate on the back. It also has a seal on that plate, so if you do happen to ever remove this plate, you would need to be conscious to get that resealed before you put the screws back in there. And once you remove that plate, you're going to see that we actually have exposure to the circuit board on this, where in the PinPoint 2 and even the PinPoint 1, that was fully potted. And the reason we decided to leave this open is that if we have any failures or any strange stuff going on, we'll actually be able to remove that back plate. One of our engineers can inspect this circuit board, so it gives us a little bit quicker turnaround on finding issues if there are actual issues with the hub. Another thing is if we zoom in on it here, one of the things you'll see is that it has an SD card on it. And the PinPoint 3 system has a variety of ways that we can update it. One of them is using your iPhone or your Android phone over the Capstan Ag app. The other way is using what we call a CAN translator, where we tee into the ISO bus and we can broadcast that update across the bus if you have the proper tools. And the third way is if you don't have the ability to tap into the ISO bus and you don't happen to have a cell phone on you, we can actually, the SD card isn't pictured here, but there's an SD card in here. We can pop that SD card out, put the update file straight on that SD card, and away we go with the update. So that's pretty much the only practical use that you would have for removing the back off of the hub. But again, the event of needing to do this is going to be very low likelihood. So these are the primary differences between what you're going to see with the PinPoint 2 and the PinPoint 3. One more really noteworthy thing is that to communicate from your phone to this hub, it uses Bluetooth. So located on this hub is a Bluetooth communication chip. And one of the things that's really important is when mounting this hub, we want to make sure that this back plate is not sandwiched up against metal. And the reason is because that Bluetooth signal will have a really hard time blasting through metal. So we try to keep the back of this open so that we can get the longest range possible out of our Bluetooth device.